What up, peeps? How's it going? This is Carpo with his coffee. Kicking with Carpo and his coffee. Uh, Today, I guess, I just wanted to kind of rant about ancient knowledge, and it's something in particular, I guess, a few different things about it. I'm a researcher of everything, but ancient knowledge is one of my favorite things. But along that search, I kind of look at it as I'm looking at it, but I'm not immersing myself in it because it's easy to get stuck in a way of thinking. For example, you know, uh, people like Pythagoras. I was watching a little short story about his life, and I've listened to quite a few lectures about him and his theories and his idea of community. And he's a great man, and he's highly revered by a lot of people. But on the same token, he also has many shortcomings, like many of the ancient philosophers do. So many of the people that we revere, he was basically the first communist, if you will. And so from his point of view, it would have worked from where he stood in his world. But now that the world's so much bigger, things have to change. The way that we see each other, the way that we see governmental methods, all these things. And at the same time, many of these ancient philosophers were very wise and had many great ideas, but they still thought that, the sun revolved around the earth, things like that. Not that that makes them dumb, but I wonder how much of the information translated is, misunderstood. A good example is before I turned on a random video on YouTube before I went to make this video, and it turned out it was spirit science, for those of you who have seen that. I didn't know it was under a different title, and it was the non-changed voice. So as soon as it came on, I heard it in the background, and I was like, oh no, because the whole first part of it's basically talking about where humans came from, and they talk about ancient Lemuria, and I'm still like, what is Lemuria? Where's the evidence? I know that there are submerged, island chains, and that the oceans have risen, but it still doesn't, many of these things are presented as fact. So while the ancient philosophers were presenting things as fact, and the ancient thinkers were presenting these facts that turned out not to be true, today we're doing the same thing, but some of the ideas we're using are from the ancients. See what I mean? We're using the stories that were written by people who were not quite sure. And, I'm fascinated with ancient Egypt. And, my question has always been, what are the purpose of these sites? And this is a good example of what I mean is the pyramids. People call them the power centers. Some people say that they were there to produce electricity because of the limestone and the type of granite they used, and because they had a lot of magnetite in the stone. Others believe that they were actually tombs. Some people still believe that. But the question remains, we can't even agree on how long ago they were built. Some say, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Some people say 15,000 years ago. Some people are saying 50,000 years ago. And meanwhile, everybody's presenting all this is the fact. This is the fact. And the fact is, it's stone, and we can't date it. We're not sure. And none of us are really archaeologists. And the archaeologists who do study it have to, they have the disputes among themselves. I trust that, in my opinion, the Sphinx was obviously recreated. I trust that the scientific studies of the area to show the weathering patterns on the Sphinx show that it is much older than shown. And if you look back to when the Nile flowed by the pyramids, that was, I think, about 15,000 years ago. Now, around 12,000 years ago, there was a huge catastrophe. And it was... it could have been a flood, it could have been a comet, it could have been, many different things. The stories of the floods definitely resonate with me and say that, perhaps that was the time of upheaval, about 10,000 BC, let's say. And this would show why we may have had advanced cultures up to that point, and all these magnificent sites that were then, left. I mean, I'm questioned about places that they've found recently, up in the last, 15, 20 years, that like some of them that have been buried on purpose. Beautiful sites buried on purpose 8,000 years ago. Why? And it these are the keys that make me believe that yes, there was an ancient advanced culture, but then we start drawing conclusions about how advanced they were and what they had and what they knew, and we can't even agree on what they knew or when they knew it or what they had. So anyway, I'm just trying to cover a few different things here. I got a couple notes on here I wanted to cover so I didn't forget. My question is, okay, the pyramids themselves. Some people will say, that they're this or that, power centers. I believe that they are information. Okay, from all the research and study I've done on the pyramids, I've found, from my armchair, I found that I believe that the pyramids were left as mathematical equations. The formulas that are tied into the dimensions of the pyramids are so perfect. So I believe that there was a time when we had mathematical knowledge and we said, how are we going to preserve this for future generations? I don't know if it was because there was something going on, they knew there was going to be some disaster, or maybe that they were dying out. Could have been a million things, but they wanted to preserve mathematical equations for us to find. There's no other reason they would have done it to such specific perfection. I mean, everything in the ancient world's laid out. And then my question is, why are they set on certain grids and ley lines? Why do they tend to, some of it's coincidence, but a lot of it is, tends to be more, it makes a lot of sense, You look at the evidence that's presented and say, well, it could be or it couldn't be. Anyway, each person has to decide for themselves whether there's any validity to it. But were aliens involved? That's the next thing I wrote down. This has been one of the biggest issues of contention among people who are trying to say that, yes, people are capable of making these things, that we have the ability to create things like that, and then people are so fascinated with it, they don't think that mankind could ever actually pull it off. So they bring aliens in. I'm not disputing that perhaps we had extraterrestrial help, or perhaps some sort of terrestrial help from another race. We just don't know. But my guess is that the Egyptians did it, and they just had methods, especially like Coral Castle. It's a perfect example, if you understand the harmonic frequencies, it's all about magnetism and frequencies. And we're still trying to figure that out. And we will figure that out. Just like Edward Leedskin, he's the guy who created Coral Castle, and he left all kinds of clues there for us to find if we're willing to look. Was Atlantis an archetype? Was Lemuria an archetype for us? Those are some of the biggest discussions people have, is whether or not many of these ideas left are facts or archetypes. Some people think that everything is literal that's written in these ancient texts, but we're finding that much of it is tied into equations, mathematics, and explanations of the self and the fractal nature of the self and the greater. What else did I find? Oh, I was just, thinking the basics, any culture would, the wheel, well, I should say any culture that was utilizing power would utilize light. And I think that the way when we view advanced culture, we think maybe there was a culture that had what we have. But that's because we see what we have as advanced. But when you really think about it, we're so reliant upon the grid. It's so primitive. We think we're advanced, but we have these weaknesses that's called electricity, power grids, and power stations. So maybe they were, advanced, but it was in a different way. I guess we'll never really know. I guess the only thing I wanted to really cover before I went was to say that the reason why I believe that the pyramids were left as merely mathematical equations is because if you look at what happened in Alexandria and so many other libraries around the world, a majority of all ancient texts have been burned. Probably 99% of all the things ever written, were burned by fearful religious persecutors, because it was only those who had a different god from the ones on the papers or whatnot that would burn such things, because it went against, it was demonic or whatever. But it's one of the saddest things to me. It's one of the most horrific things that's ever happened in history, is the destruction of all that written knowledge. And the ancients knew that this would happen, because it's the nature of man to destroy what he doesn't understand. And this is why I believe the pyramids were built. They were built as a book to be read by future generations, because they knew that nobody could destroy them. And regardless of who built them, why they were built is so they could withstand the test of time. And the location they are and the way that they're built, they cannot be destroyed. I mean, how could you? So we've destroyed all types of statues, tablets, writings, hieroglyphics. The pyramids remain, and the dimensions remain. So I think we really have to look at this and ask ourselves, what is it telling us overall? Is it just an explanation of math? Is it just a way of showing future generations, that pi is important, that phi, the Fibonacci sequence or the phi ratio? All these different things are tied into these pyramids, and all around the world, all different types of structures have these same inclusions, which is why, if you want to say that these are built as a representation or a gift to the gods, if you will, then their god was mathematics. And we have to figure out why. And I think that we are, because people now are seeing these ratios everywhere in nature, and now that we have machines that can actually analyze objects in a way that we never could before with our eyes, we can see these same dendritic patterns, these same sequences, these same ratios everywhere. So, I guess that's it. Does math get us closer to knowing truth? And if so, how complicated does it have to be? And this is why I still believe that the triage of knowledge to help is mathematics, sacred geometry, and natural observation. And that's that. Peace out. I'll talk to y'all later, maybe. Heading out for the week, maybe. Go on a trip. Namaste.